Morning everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. You join me on an absolutely lovely sunny morning here in Yorkshire, and the sun is set to shine for the rest of the day and the rest of the week actually. I'm stood in front of one of my all-time favourite flowers. So why is tulip one of my favourite flowers? Well, the more I speak to people, the more I realise that if you have a love of flowers, quite often you associate a love of a certain variety with a memory, be that of a person, a place or a time. My memory associated to tulips comes via my grandma. So I spent a lot of time with my grandparents as a child, and my grandma and granddad absolutely loved tulips. They went to Holland more or less every year. And my grandma particularly really loved tulips. My granddad was more on the dahlia chrysanthemum side of things, but my gran loved tulips. And when I had done my art degree and was a bit unsure what sort of career path I was going to take in the future, I actually drove up one day and saw my grandma, and she was stood on her allotment. It was on a bit of a bank, and she was stood at the top of her allotment, and she'd seen my car pull up, and she started shouting, "Woo, Susie, I'm up here." And up along the left-hand side of her allotment, it was just absolutely covered with masses of tulips. And I just remember thinking, wow, wow, what an amazing sight it was. All the different colours and different varieties that were there. It kind of looked from a distance like an amazing painting. And I think it was at that point that I actually started to think, yeah, flowers might be a part of my future career plan. So I always had this association with flowers, why I came into flower farming, and my grandma basically. So tulips have this ingrained emotion in me as a relevance to why I came into flower farming. See, in supermarkets, tulips can be fairly inexpensive to buy. But when you grow tulips as a cut flower farmer, in the varieties like I grow them and many other flower farmers grow them, they can be quite an expensive crop to actually grow in this way. The supermarket tulips that you see around in spring have been grown hydroponically, so they've been grown in water trays, in greenhouses, and they're not actually grown in soil. And generally they've been planted mechanically, so there's very little labour costs involved in producing those flowers. Whereas there's quite a high labour cost involved in planting a load of tulip bulbs in autumn. But for me, I would never walk away from growing tulips, even though last year I had an absolute disaster with tulips. And it was the first year since I started growing that I've hardly had any tulips to harvest. That was because in the field over winter, last winter was really wet, and I'd planted them like I normally plant them in a long trench, and I'd been doing that for years. But in this field last winter, the clay soil held a lot of water, and there was actually a river running through my tulip bed. Now I knew this wasn't good, and I lost about 90% of my tulip crop, which for me as a tulip lover was absolutely devastating. So this year I decided to plant all my tulips in wooden crates. So the crates that I've used to plant them in are actually builders' crates, things that stone flags, bricks, roofing slates get delivered in. And these were all going to be thrown away. So I thought I'll repurpose them and grow my tulips in them. Then at least they're elevated from the ground in case we have another wet winter. I also grew tulips in large plastic pots as well, and they've done really well. Now, because we've had a really hot spring, the tulip season hasn't lasted as long as I would like. I'd like tulip season to last for a lot longer than it actually does. Now, to stagger that crop, what I do is I grow some tulips in the tunnel and some tulips outside, and that doubles my tulip harvest season, because the tulips inside flower in mid-March, and then these are the last batch of my tulips flowering outside now at the end of April. Normally they would go into the second week of May, but because it's been lovely and sunny, they're not going to this year. We don't actually cut tulips, we pull tulips, and I'll show you how I do that now. So these are some lovely parrot varieties of tulips that I'm pulling out first. So I just put my hand down into the crate, grab right at the bottom of the tulip and pull. When we're looking at time to harvest your flowers, it really depends on what you're wanting them for. If I'm wanting them for vase life, then I would pick them at this stage here. And this stage is called colour bud. So there's colour coming out, but it's kind of still in bud. like this one here. That'll open in a vase, absolutely no problem. So when looking at tulips like this is a gorgeous apricot parrot variety here. Now this is fully open, and I know for a fact it was in flower yesterday, but tulips last really well in a vase, so I'd still pick that, but just being mindful that you will get less vase life off it because it's fully open and in flower, but you'll still get a week off that tulip there. This one here is Charming Lady, and you can see that it still has green on it, but that's absolutely fine for picking. Round the edge of this tulip crate you'll see that I've also planted garlic. Now that's to deter rodents, because they absolutely love to dig up tulip bulbs, but they don't like the smell of garlic. Now you'll probably be able to see on this stem here there's a white section at the bottom. That's the section that was under the ground. So you can see the depth that this tulip was planted was 3 times the depth of the bulb, which is ideal. Now when we lift them, we gain all this extra stem length. So you can see there how tall that is. So that's Charming Lady, and that flower stem there is flowering at about 50 to 60 centimetres. I haven't got a tape measure to measure it, but you can see there by the size of my secateurs how long that stem is. So by pulling it, we've gained extra stem length. But when you're growing tulips, you also have to be aware that there's a thing called tulip blight or tulip fire. Now that's a sporal disease, and it gets into the ground. And if you perennialise your tulips and you get tulip fire, it'll actually wipe out the tulips. And it's a horrible, horrible disease. It's sporal, like I say. Once it's in the ground, you've got it. So safest bet, if you're growing your tulips as a cut flower crop, is that we lift the tulip bulbs every year by pulling them, and that tulip bulb will get discarded. Now number one, that's because we don't want to risk tulip fire on the crops if we plant in fresh bulbs alongside perennialised bulbs, but also because with tulips it's not like a daffodil. With a daffodil you can cut the flower stem and leave the rest of the foliage to die back down, which gets reabsorbed into the bulb itself, and it's that nutrients that produces the next year's growth. But when you harvest a tulip stem and you pull the stem out, we cut off the bulb, and that means that that tulip bulb, unlike a daffodil bulb, is unable to reabsorb any of the nutrients from that foliage. So therefore it's got no feed to produce next year's flowers, and it has to get discarded. So therefore tulips become an annual crop, meaning that you have to replenish your bulbs every year and grow fresh. So that then sadly becomes surplus to our requirements as a growing bulb. There we go, you can see I've picked myself an absolutely beautiful armload of tulips there with the bulb still on. Now, how to condition these tulips. I must say at this point that even if you condition them in this way, they'll be strong and straight to begin with, but they will always grow and bend to the light, because tulips are quite incredible, and they're the only flower stem that continues to grow in the vase. And like many other flower stems, they will always move and wiggle to the light. That is the nature of tulips. But to stop them looking floppy, like those parrots bouncing around on the side there, we're going to condition these flowers first before we start to arrange them, to make them extra strong and sturdy in your vase. So these lovely tulips that I've grown are going to end up in a birthday bouquet this evening. So what I need to do now is condition the flowers first before I start to make the bouquet. So the first thing that you have to do is remove the bulb itself and discard it. And then you need to prepare the stem. Now tulips have a lot of leafy growth on them, as you can see, and that can get in the way when you start to arrange, and it really brings nothing to the beauty of the flower itself. So I remove quite a lot of this foliage before I start to condition the flowers. Now this is quite unhealth and safety, but I do it in this way. So I get my snips, really sharp snips, and I put them to the base of the leaf itself, and then I turn the stem and it cuts off that leaf there, and it makes it nice and tidy. And then I'm going to remove that one. So you just have to be careful with this, that you're only pressing to remove the leaf itself. There we go. So from this point, this is how I condition the stems to make sure that they're nice and strong. I've got 2 layers of tissue paper folded into a V, and really quite tightly actually. I'm just going to nip that round there. At this part of the process, these flowers are not displayed decoratively. This is for the conditioning process, so you can see they're quite tightly packed there. There's a bit of tension on that tissue paper. And then from this point, they're going to go into some cool water for 8 hours, along with the other stems I'm going to use to make the bouquet. Ingredients for the rest of the bouquet includes raspberry foliage, Symphoricarpus foliage, apple blossom, poppies in flower and in bud, my first few stems of Orleia, Allium quinnii, ranunculus, ranunculus butterfly, geum, totally tangerine, and the lovely tulips. And there we have it, an absolutely bouncing spring bouquet full of all the best bits of the end of April, including gorgeous tulips. I hope you've enjoyed the video and liked the bouquet, and it's inspired you to grow some cut flowers of your own this year so you can pick handfuls of beauty like these. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!